Do we have anybody who is new to the program? I'm recognizing most of these names. Yeah, I think everybody has been here before. So welcome to those of you that haven't been here in a while. And the usual codicil is that I am not John Cogswell. I am never going to be John Cogswell. I'm just a student of his work who's sharing my process through his book with you. And today's topics, we're going to do some setting of some of the basket settings that we did in the last sessions. And I'm going to show you some of the finished pieces that I got a little polished up, meant to get more polished up on them. And then we're going to modify very small modifications on a couple of tools. Then we are going to hopefully at least get started on a basket setting for a teardrop, for a teardrop shaped stone. I don't expect we'll get through all of that because we're going to do the round settings two ways. We're going to do by hand and we're going to do with burrs. And so since last session, I made a much smaller version of the 4-prong basket setting because I realized I don't have a burr setting in the large size that we were working on. So let me pull those up for you guys and you can see what we have from past sessions, recent past sessions. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit for you. No, that's colored. I don't want the zoom. Give me a sec. It's not going to behave for the zoom right now. There we go. How's that? It's a little blurry when it's on this particular camera, but it's at least gives you a sense of it, I hope. Okay, so what we've got here is the setting that we finished, the reverse setting that we finished, I think last session, maybe it was the session before. This is the one where we used the jump ring in the back to set down and fold over. I'm going to remind you to stay muted if you're not asking questions, just so we don't get background noises, but maybe it's only me getting them. The setting on this one I had not done before, and it's sort of cool because it's sort of a cross between the way you might do certain kinds of rivets and a bezel itself. You're just using the ring of metal that we set inside of it, just under the rim. Some of the challenges we ran into is that if we're working with a heavy gauge metal, like we need to for the strength of this setting, we're going to need to file down our top edge so it thins it out a little bit so that we can actually push it over. And it needs to be a nice snug fit of that jump ring in order to really, where's my machine jumping around on me? There we go. In order for it to really hold the stone in place. And this one counted on us having a very clean, tight fit at the angle of the stone itself. So this was designed for a bullet setting. Ostensibly, you could do it with other kinds of settings by making yourself a ring, and it doesn't even have to be done with a round setting.
Just that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's
just think of
so
the setting
cool
as, I mean, think of the ring as a piece of a stone bezel. You're just reversing the concept. So you're using that as what's holding down the stone. As long as you got a flat surface that you're putting the inner frame against, you should be able to work it. Even if it's like a square or something abstract, you just need that flat surface and then enough of a lip to cut up and over. So obviously this isn't a very exciting setting. Oops, I'm out of frame. Let me zoom a little further back. There we go. That's probably a little clearer.
So how would you design that into a piece in terms of the way the bullet is coming out? And
yeah.
I mean, how would you, I mean, I can see it as an earring or whatever, but I mean, it's just so cool the way the bullet looks. But how would you, if you didn't put the stone in, how would you design it?
So I would do the same basic thing that I did, just on a larger back plate. It's just that you have to think about the height and think about how much of this you want resting against the body if, say, it's a necklace. Right? Because that's going to be pushing against the skin when it rests there. So if you're building something that's more of a frame, I've seen a lot of people do these reverse settings if they've got, say, a two-tiered like two layered thing where you've got some tubing that you're using to lift the second layer off the top. Let me draw that one because my hands are not going to represent that very well. So let's say you've got a design of an interesting pendant and you want maybe some piercing through it. So you've got your stone that you've got set in from here, and then you've got some piercing here. So it shows through to whatever you've done on the back plate. And so there's something.
Wait, Rachel, bring it down just a tad.
Yeah, let me actually zoom all the way back out. Oh, come here, zoom. I am not a fan of Apple products because they make things like zooming difficult. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we've got a back plate back here that, let's say we put some cool texture on, and maybe we go in and we put in some mokume gane or something under here that's going to show through. And we want to have a stone, but we want this top to be otherwise smooth. This behind the scenes would be that setting, right? So poking up out of it is the stone that we've set, and it appears to have nothing holding it there unless you look in between and see what's there. Okay. This is a great piece for a rivet setting where you're just running two tubes or however many you need to support the kind of design you're doing. And you're just putting a heavy back plate riveted down to another, or even soldered if you wanted to. It's just a little trickier because you've got a stone in place by the time you've got that, because you're going to need to set your stone. So either it needs to be one that can handle the heat, or you're going to want to rivet this last plate on right here and right here once you've got it all set and polished and everything. And that's something I realize we haven't talked a lot about, is when do you polish? And the answer is it needs to be really well polished on all of these settings before you really set the stone. It's super risky to the stone, and especially if you're using transparent stones, you want your insides bright polished or blackened, as the case may be. It depends on what your effect is going to be. But get your cleanup done before you go into setting mode on any of these. So that's one way that I could see using the behind the scenes setting. Give it a little more dimension there. So this is our stone. Looks a little bit like a unicorn that's been through the ringer. But
Yeah, I can
you
see
get the
how that
gist.
could be so cool.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
like
it
maybe
is
with
a lot
some
of potential.
tubes,
Pardon?
like a tube or something in between, like the tube.
So these would be tubes just to make it. So if I
Okay.
were looking at this side on, what I'd have is a tube that I rivet and another tube here that I rivet. And if you were to look at the side view, you would see the back of what we've set, right? So the jump ring that we set in there is all on here, which means, of course, that we have to have our stone set before we rivet the last of this together. Otherwise, there's no way for us to access the setting point on that stone. Yeah. So this particular setting is a new one to me. I love doing reverse setting on faceted stones, and it's the same principles as we did here, except for we don't necessarily need the ring. It's that you're building a step bezel. So let's say we've got a basic step bezel, and instead of building it with the step down here, we're building it with the step up here, and we're just building it shallow enough that the back facets of the stone show through, right? So what we're doing then is, if we were to look at it flipped over, this would be the normal top right here. This would be the normal top side of a faceted stone. But what we're instead doing is we're setting it the way we would if it were facing upright. We're just setting it all from the back side. And this is another one that you would put into a plate of some kind, your back plate, so that all of this stuff is hidden. And what it does is it gives you, I wouldn't do it with a super pointy round facet or something, like something fragile. You don't want the tip of it coming out, and especially not on a ring or something, because somebody hits that end of the stone on a desk or something, and it's going to crack the stone. But some really nicely cut, something that isn't as steeply pointed. So something that's a square or a soft cut of some kind, backside of a rose cut. If you're really clean in your setting, you can make it a reversible pendant. It'll look good from both sides. But again, the case here is that the trick of this reverse setting is that we're doing it with a very, very shallow, we're intentionally breaking that rule that says we want our coulette to be inside the setting. So we're pushing the coulette up and above the setting when we do that. Okay, so I'm a huge fan. Play around with the idea of your stone doesn't always have to face the way that people expect it to. Just consider the ramifications of how it's going to be used. This is one that puts your stone at greater risk if it's banged against something, because we're putting the weakest points upwards. Questions about that one?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that's amazing how the possibilities are endless.
Yeah. All right. So that's all that I have to show from the earlier ones right now, except for what we're going to actually set today and play around with today. So I was distressed by that blob that if you guys were watching last time, you remember that I had to reposition and fill. So I got really distressed by that one. So I set that aside and I made another one that doesn't have the resoldered little divot mark, because when I was trying to clean it up, it was bugging me. We're probably not going to set this one today just for time's sake, but the setting procedure on this one is the same as what we're going to do on the very first one we did, where we did the faceted setting. So it's again just a basket setting. In this case, it's a 4-prong. In this case, it was a 3-prong, and we can treat it the same way in how we cut the seat and everything for this. So the only difference is that when you're doing a faceted stone with a coulette and so on, you sometimes want to get a bit more of an angle cut in to your seat so that it nests a little more snugly, but not always. Like this stone fits well enough as is that once we get it set well against the prongs, it's going to rest nicely into that ring that we created for it, into the upper bearing. I did a teeny tiny little one of the same exact shape, style, rather basket setting, again, because I didn't have any larger setting burrs than this. So I can only set this one by hand. And I want to show you a trick that John showed us for when you're just practicing. So once you make a setting that you just want to practice, how do you set it, and you're not planning on putting in anything, all he does is he solders with medium or easy solder a little back plate that we can then hold in any old ring clamp. So all I'm doing is giving myself some support. I can hold it tightly enough. Some support, just something to grip it by. And later, once I have it set, I could trim that away and file it off. So all I've done with this one is put it where I don't have prongs. Where I don't have prongs. The challenge being that by soldering it again, you risk all of those solder points that we've done. So it's just a good practice exercise if you don't want to set it down in pitch, which you could also do, or in any of the other materials we've talked about. So I did that just so that we could see it, because it's easier to hold. What I like is when I'm setting, this one we're going to set by burr. And when I'm setting it that way, I want to have a really firm position to hold it so that I can go very upright. Because my problem, I have a terrible time with off balance cuts when I'm getting a stone positioned. And the more stable I can hold it, the better. So that's what we're going to do with that one. And in case I forgot to mention these as an earlier practice run, Rio has these really lovely calibrated CZs in some phenomenal colors. So when I teach this live in person and I'm giving students a chance to play around, I usually bring an array. Oh my goodness, the brightness of this light is doing me in. Hang on. Let you see these colors for real. So these are just some of the vivid colors that you can get in the CZs. And they're super cheap and they're perfectly calibrated. So if you need a stone to practice with, get yourself a bunch of different size CZs and, buy 10 of them, because they sell them in packs basically, and play around. If you break one, you break one. If you don't, you put it in something nice. And just as long as you tell people it's CZ, you're good.
Hey, Rachel.
Yep.
Can I share something with you guys that I discovered 2 weeks ago?
Sure.
You know the ring holder that you've got there?
Yeah.
I've always used mine exactly like you have, with
Yeah.
it going. I saw this person use it on the side,
Huh. Yeah, I can see
like
that.
at the end. Yeah, like that. I've never seen it done that way before. And
That's
I thought,
actually-
well, gosh, that would be a lot simpler.
It's a nice stabilizer. That's awesome.
Yeah, isn't that weird? All these years, 15 years, I've never seen anybody use it that way.
Very cool.
Never occurred to me. Yeah, I just
So-
wanted to share.
Well,
This
thanks for
particular one is-
sharing. That's great.
Yeah, that is neat. And yeah, there's a lot of potential for how can you then connect it to things? Like you could put it in your clamp, in your vise more easily.
Absolutely.
This particular clamp, you'll notice has John's name on it. Because I got a bunch of tools from him as he was cleaning out his studio a bit. So I felt I had to use it for this. And it's got something going on with it that mine don't have, which is that I can't tell whether it's designed to be this loose or it's been stretched by the years of working, but he's got something about it that it expands to what you need. And either way, I wish I could make my more modern one do the same thing, but it doesn't. Like it just doesn't have that movement to it. I don't know if you guys shop around and you do junk sales for jewelry tools the way that I do. See if you can find some like that, and we'll figure out whether it's design or simply the years of John's hands doing what he does to it, or maybe he did a secret modification that I can't tell from the inside. Like he may have filed something down that was critical to make it fit better. I don't know. Thank you for that tip. That was wonderful. So we'll decide based on our positioning whether that makes more sense, that makes more sense, or this makes more sense. This might give me a little bit better grip. Good call. So what I love about those kind of tips is that I am constantly reminded that just because we've always done it that way is not a good reason to keep always doing it that way. There's always new things to learn. I myself am taking a stone setting class with a woman named Deb Karras out here who teaches various places around the country, but mostly Pacific Northwest. And it's several of the things she's teaching are things that I also teach, but others are things that I always want to be learning other people's ways of doing it, because I may pick up the tip that makes my experience that much cleaner, that much better, or break me past a frustration point on a specific type of setting. So please go out and study with as many people as you have the time and wherewithal to study with, because there's more to learn. There's always more to learn. So with that in mind, let's talk about why we are doing two different types of settings in the book. And if you want to follow along at home, we are starting on page 101 and going for a bunch of pages in this one. We're going to go probably till about 108 today. So one of the reasons it is very important for you to learn both approaches to setting is that setting with a burr is much simpler on a round than on any other shape because burrs spin. Pretty basic. But I'm going to chat at you for a bit, so bear with me while I bounce cameras. But because of that, you need to be able to you may have a funny shape, you may have a cutback in a stone. Some of my favorite, I don't know how I'm going to set them stones, have a convex and a concave curve, both. And how do we get in to get the prong exactly where we need it? So if we can't do that by hand with our files, we're going to have a challenging time. There are people out there who can cut any seat they want individually with the burrs. I am not one of them, or at least I'm not one of them yet. It takes a lot of practice to have the precision and control to be cutting down a single setting, a single prong without cutting something on the other side by accident. So the more you know about the hand finishing, even if you end up using a blend and you start with burrs and then finish out with hand or vice versa, the better off you'll be. So don't skimp, especially on the hand setting. You can always do the hand cut. You can't always do the burr cut, depending on your situation and how tiny the stone setting is or how it's positioned and that sort of thing. So on page 101, he talks about a few things. In the order of the book, he does it a little bit oddly. He tells us to prep our barrette file, but then we don't use it until we get to shaping the prongs. So I'm going to actually do that towards the end of this discussion. But I want to point out towards the bottom of the first column, 3 specific shapes of needle files are required for cutting seats by hand: a round, a crossing, and a barrette. Okay. Crossing, as I've told you in other sessions, is my absolute live and die. Barrette is my other live and die. I'd have to figure out. I don't know which one I'd pick for the desert island if I could only have one. But they are also not the only ones that other stone setters use. So this is just John's chosen set of files. And as we work through the shapes that he cuts into his prongs, it'll make more sense how he uses each one. He also starts out and tells us to use a plastic toothbrush, which I have not got one modified. So if we have time, I'll modify one. I may have to go dig up my toothbrush. And he also reminds us to be really precise in marking and measuring. So the first step that we're going to do on the one that we're going to cut by hand is we're going to use a big black Sharpie and just blacken in the edges and blacken in the insides of the prongs thoroughly, because this is going to guide our work. So all I've done is I've blackened the inside of each prong, and we're going to measure from there. So I want you all, if you're marking up your books like I do, almost, so it's the top of the last paragraph on the right-hand column. It says the notches will not be cut on the marks, but rather slightly below them. Make note of that. And further on, he says, file the notches about 1 millimeter below the scribed marks. I'm going to give you an opinion that is mine and not what's in the book, which is that you need to pay attention to how big the girdle of your stone is for that decision. It's not every stone can afford 1 millimeter below the mark you put. If it's a very, very thick or very, very thin girdle, you're going to have a different amount from where we're marking. So he's talking in generalities. A well-cut stone on average probably is about 1 millimeter or less below that mark, but don't just take it as gospel is what I would say on that. And also very important is that when we do this filing, we're not going more than 1/3 of the thickness of the prong. If you're finding that that's not enough and you're still not able to get your stone in place, there's 2 big possibilities. One is you need to change the gauge of your wire, or more likely you made your setting a little smaller than you think you made it. And you maybe need to just be a little bit more generous with how you're positioning it. Because what we want ultimately, and what you'll get if you have a well-calibrated stone in a manufactured and well-calibrated pre-made setting, is a little click once our cut-in is done. It should pop. So thank you for whoever caught the page. Yes, we're on 101 and just at the bottom. And then let me make sure I did all the notes I wanted to about that. All right, and then that brings us up to the top of page 102. And the pictures in page 102 give you the basic activities, and do not, you'll note, have the barrette file listed anywhere, because we're not using the barrette file until we're shaping our prongs. It took me a while to realize why he wanted that prepped, and I think it's just the order of how he put it in the book that was a little confusing. So with that in mind, oh, wrong screen, we're not using the torch yet. So with that in mind, and with my Sharpie marks put in place, I am resting my stone. Get this a little further onto the bench for you guys. Here we go, a little more centered. So I'm resting the stone neatly and evenly placed, and that's the tricky part for me. If you have challenges holding it in place because it's tiny, if it's super slippery or an awkward shape, then you're going to use, if you have it, and if I can find where the heck I put mine down, because I pulled it out to show you guys. If you don't have any of Kate Wolf's sticky wax, let me get mine. It's called Wicked Sticky. I don't know where my piece of fell on the ground. That's why I couldn't find it. So Wicked Sticky. And you will be able to share the box that it comes in with your 15 closest neighbors, because there's a lot of wax in there. It's used for other things. But you just, like, this piece is the only piece I've used, and I've given a pile to friends. So, and sometimes you need to put a little talcum powder or some kind of soft, not scratchy material in, chalk powder maybe, enough to get it a little less sticky, because it's super duper sticky. But this is great for grabbing a stone and pulling it out if you're having problems getting your stone in and out. And it's also, if you're careful with it, you can use it to hold the position you need, so it's not moving as you mark things. So I'm just gonna give myself a little bit narrower tip to hold so that I can sort of keep downward pressure. Because what I want is to start out with my marks at the right level. And I need to scribe all of these at the same position, right inside. Scribe is not fine enough. Give me a moment. Find another one. It'll be finer. Maybe. So I'm looking to scribe right at the point where the top of the stone meets the prong. And again, this is not going to be my cutting in point. This is merely a mark that I use relative to the girdle height. And I definitely do not have a millimeter to go below it. Sure, I can actually see those marks. I cannot. Bear with me while I get my lines darker. And this is harder the tinier your work is. So again, as you're starting, I recommend start a little larger and work your way down, same as you would if you were, say, making chains. Let's try that scratching up again. So again, make sure you're resting level, which I am not now. Hang on. Resting level. Score the mark. Goodness, we're not scoring well at all. Go. Check the level. Yeah, this is just gonna get in the way.
Rachel?
Yeah.
So you're scribing on the outside of the prong or the...
Nope, the inside of the prong, but above the table. I'll draw this. Actually, I think he has a good drawing on the drawing number 1 on page 102. So we're marking the interior mark, but at the top of the stone. The challenge is my stone wants to slip on me.
Okay, thank you.
Not the top of the stone, Rachel, isn't it the top of the girdle?
Above the girdle, yeah. So it's the top surface of the stone, not the table of the stone. So yeah, it's above the girdle. It's the edge right above the girdle. Basically where we would see the fold happen. So you can actually see all those marks. I can now. Okay, and I definitely do not have a millimeter. I don't even have half a millimeter to go for the cut-in point. On as per his directions on page 101. Because we need to cut below the mark, but we're way below the mark on this one. Now, the taller, the snugger your setting, like if you've made one that sits further down the stone, you may have a millimeter, but it's going to depend on where your stone is sitting. So I am now going to use, the order I'm supposed to work these is the round file. And I am fortunate enough to have a really teeny tiny round file. this is a watchmaker's file, and if you can find yourself a watchmaker's file, get it. Because it gives you so much more precision than even the mini files that you can get with the, say, the Euro Tools kit or something. And so I'm very carefully filing, and I want to make sure that I'm staying centered to my prong, meaning I don't want to tip one way or the other. I need it to be facing the middle of my setting. And I'm just going to start one, work the opposite side. And what I'm doing is going just below the mark I made, an even amount around the circle. Unless you happen to have a stone that's so badly cut that the girdle is taller on one side. I've seen stones like that. I try to avoid buying them.
Rachel?
Yep.
What cut is that file? Is it like a 2 or a 4 or a
No,
6?
he recommends a 4, and these are so old that I don't even have a cut on it. Plus, they are finer than any other gauging file I've seen. But John's recommending, somewhere in the pages, he recommends that they be number 4s. I think maybe back where he talked about the files that we should use. Yep, the
Okay.
number 4 cut is ideal, he says on page 101. And the reason for that is that it's sharp enough to remove the necessary amount of metal, but fine enough to prevent coarse scratches that will be difficult to remove later.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I've done the 2 opposite sides. Now I'm going to work the others. Again, just below. And so I want to reiterate, I am very carefully working directly opposite. If I were to tilt this way, my cut in would be in the wrong position. It would be pointing like this across the stone. I need these to be pointing to the other side, which means when we go to do, say, our 3-prong guy, right? We don't have that guide. It's still critical that we're going to whatever is directly opposite the position of the prong. So, because if I start to file a little off key, it's not going to sit cleanly in the seat. So again, just getting the base cut in, and then I'll go back and clean them up a little bit. Opposite side. And I'll bring this over to the good camera once I've got the base cut. I'll see if we can see it enough on that camera, because I don't think I can really show you much better on here than you're seeing. Such a tiny little cut in. And again, where our goal is ultimately to go no more than 1/3 of the way into each prong. So check frequently, do just a few strokes of the file once you've got your baseline down. I'm still at about 1/4 on these. Okay, so I've now completed step 1. Let me go over to the good camera and we'll see if we can get a zoom that does anything worthwhile for you guys. Zoom in. Too far zoomed in. Can I get it so you guys can see? Does not seem to want to focus right now, does it? Are you guys able to see where I've cut in, where it's silver again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. So I don't know if you'll be able to get enough to see the actual amount I cut in, but trust me, it's about 1/3.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go back over, and you can do a test fit. The snugger that you fit, the more this is likely to click into place, but its true fit isn't going to happen until we've done the next step, because that's what's going to let us put it down, hold it down.
Switch cameras, Rachel.
Thank you. I thought I had. Okay, so I'm actually a little bit loose on this. It's gonna get, this could have been a slightly tighter setting. Because what I've got is, now that I've got them cut away, I've got a smidge of excess between the stone and the prong, which also shows me that I may need to cut a little. Nope, that's just gonna, so it's gonna, I'm gonna trust the process. What I'm seeing is that I could have cut a smidge lower, but I think that it's going to be exactly where I want it to be once I cut this next stage of it, which I'm doing with a crossing file. In this case, it is a 4. And if you have a smaller one, I may have a smaller one. If you have a tiny one, when you're working this small, this is a good time to try to go as controllable as you can. Oops, that's not a crossing file. Meaning the smaller files are going to give you a little bit better handle on just how much material you're taking away. And this is, I don't know, I think the Euro Tools default is a 2. I don't know that they have multiple types. So all I'm
Rachel,
doing, yep.
I was reading in the book, like you're supposed to like file one prong at a time, and then I don't know, I could be confused, but then put the stone in to measure it. But you
Yes,
didn't
so
do that, right?
I did. Oh, so is he saying to do each prong and measure it? Because what I did was cut all of them,
Yeah,
and then I checked it. Where are you
okay.
seeing put each one separately?
That's what I thought, unless I'm getting confused with the chapters.
It's quite possible that I missed something. That happens a lot these days.
Number
Okay.
1 says, mark the places where the stone touches each prong.
Yep. And then
And so that's what you did, all of
Yep.
them, right? Yeah.
I marked all of them, and then I cut all of them with phase 1. So notches will be slightly below. Yeah, I think you want to do the whole set at a time.
Okay, so I must be confused maybe with the bearing then.
So I think what you may be pointing at is the temporarily insert the stone to check the fit and to make sure the notches are all filed at the same level.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, so it's still about confirming that you didn't put one, say, a 1/4 millimeter higher than the other, in which case now would be the time to correct on the round filing. You just file a little lower down, because what we're about to do, we have done. Yeah, gang, never be afraid to call me out if I've missed something, because, you know, I've gone over this material a bunch, but it doesn't mean that it all stuck in my brain. So thank you for pulling that question out. So what we have done is, we got the 2 bearings here. What we have done thus far is we marked it and then cut this to no more than 1/3. Oops, I'm not even in screen, sorry. So we've got our prong, we marked it, we cut with the round file. And what we're now going to do is change that round profile to be this profile. Right? Because what this does is our facet, our girdle sits right in that curve. And then this that we're going to clean up in phase 2 can allow it to fold tightly over so that it fits. If we had left just the round, as soon as we had left it just round without doing this next step we're about to, as soon as we put the stone in and start pushing down, all the pressure is going to be at that point, right? So the purpose of taking away the next stage is to give us something that follows the angle of the facet that it's about to push up against. And then once we've got that, we'll know just how much we can trim away at the top when we're shaping our prong. Right? Same principle is going to apply when we do this via burr. It's just that it happens all at once because our downward action of the burr is going to cut something a little bit more like that. right? So whereas the hand cut one ends up with a slightly gentler curve, this one's going to get the angle with the straight because we're cutting down with a setting burr that has that profile. Okay, and that's actually an important thing that it took me a while to realize that one of the things that everybody seems to have their own variation of is what burrs they use when setting. John will also tell you that he'll happily use a ball burr for certain settings because it essentially creates this shape, right? It gives the gentler curve. And what it allows is a gap for, we're not pushing any of the pressure points. You may remember we used a ball burr in the corners of our angled settings when we're doing the step bezels because we needed to make a pocket for our corners. The same holds true on the fragility of the edge of your stone. The girdle can be one of the weakest points because it's taking the most pressure. So by doing this hand cut, that gives us that little pocket around where we're pushing down, whereas this does not. So a flame or bud burr can do a gentle profile. A round can do a gentle profile. That's why I say take from a lot of different instructors. Even when John is teaching this class live, he's giving us variations on what you see in the book. So think about what its profile is doing for your stone.
Okay, that makes it clear. Thank you.
Good, good, good. So now I'm taking
Excellent explanation, Rachel.
Good.
That's great.
Good. Yeah, and again, part of why we do it by hand is so that we can hit those circumstances that we just can't catch with the burr. So now what I'm doing is I'm grinding away, or I'm filing away from the top of what I cut with the circle file to make a sort of flattened up profile from that point up.
And you're doing that with what file?
I'm using a crossing file.
Okay.
Yeah, and remember that most but not all crossing files file both forward and back. And therefore they'll take material away a little faster than you think they will. So be gentle with it when you're first starting out. But it's also a super powerful one because you get two different curvatures. There's a slight change in curvature from one side to the other. So depending on how steep you want the angle, you can switch sides. Yeah, it's a good file. I like them. I use them in my hollow forms in particular.
So is that file still a watch file?
No, I wish this were. The only ones that I have in the watchmakers in crossing files are these giant ones, and I feel like I'm going to lose a little too much control. I'm worried I'm going to file. That's another thing. The more prongs you have, the more the prongs themselves get in the way when you're trying to file one that's down below. So the tinier your file, the happier you'll be. And I don't have any itty bitty little ones, the micro minis.
Okay.
I'm finding that this filing job is harder to keep parallel to the other side. So I need to slow down is what it tells me. I need to take slower strokes and check my work. Oops, did I do all four? Oops, I missed one. And this is absolutely one of those practice things. If I were doing these daily, I would, you know, be flying through this cutting process, but it's not, I don't use a whole lot of basket set in my own work. I tend to like modified step bezels more than I do a basic prong. So I'm either going to get super fancy with something pronged, or I'm going to get a different kind of setting. And there's a reason that in the industry, the majority of training, of professional training, separates out the stone setting training from bench jeweler training. So high end, what you're trained to do is either one or the other, because this is a specific art form unto itself. I'm going to bring this back over to the powered camera, super power, and you'll see just how much more material we have taken away. Hopefully, if I can get it in focus. Okay, so you see how we now have material all the way up almost, which is that profile that I talked about. I'm not sure the profile is going to show. Maybe a little bit, you can see it. So it's got a little cut in and then angles up.
Yeah.
Okay. All the way around, all 4 or 17 or however many prongs you've decided to put on your prong setting. Because remember, I'm still going to make one of those 7s one of these days. Okay, so from there, we do a little bit of cleanup of it to make sure that we have no scratchy bits. And that could include, at this point, if you wanted to be really precise about it, you could take a little burnisher. You could take, I'm going to go with a Swifty wheel, which I've talked to you guys about in the past. Swifty is a really great little cleanup rubberized wheel. And it's gentle on the work while also still cutting material away a little bit. It blends mistakes in soldering. If you've got a little solder overflow, it doesn't risk a stone if you're up close to it. Not sure I do it up close to an opal, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with it. And all I'm doing is trying to basically deburr the inside of the prong. And it also sort of polishes it up. If I were doing this for a finished piece, I would absolutely do any tumbling, any proper polishing that I need to do. I would take my time and really sand all of the pieces down. What I have not done and will not do for a little bit is I haven't trimmed my piece back. I've still left myself plenty of material above the stone. Okay, so now what I've got is prongs that if I push them down, they're going to hold against the facet. And here's one thing that John didn't make any statements about that I could find in my reading of the book. Maybe he does it in a different chapter and I missed it, but he didn't talk about where you put a setting, a prong down on your facet. Well, let's go with the circle and the rough circle and our rough circle. And we've got different types of facets all the way around, and different cuts will get us different facet patterns, right? So roughly that's the facet pattern. And then we've got larger facets sometimes up at the top. So look at one of your round stones and figure out what your pattern look is. The one thing we do not really want is our prongs going right up an angle, right? But this is one of those things that you will have jewelers in battles over where you position it. Because especially on a if you ever go look at like Jared's or something like that and look at their set diamonds. Obviously they don't all have diamonds in, a lot of them have placeholder stones, but if it's been set off center, the whole piece looks wrong, right? So the first thing you want to do is decide whether you're going up to one of the lower levels or whether you're going to something, depending on the facet, is there a wider facet? Sometimes there's this kind of a pattern. So there's a little facet that comes up along the edge. It depends on the cut of the stone. And you could ostensibly just have prongs go over those little guys. But in any case, don't put it over something that comes to a point at the edge of the stone. Because again, just like when we corner a stone or whatever, that's our weak spot. And if you think about it, if we were to blow that up, what would be happening is our prong would be sort of sitting on top of a point. It would sort of rest like that. Whereas if we put it on one of the facets, we have a flat surface that it can push all the way down to, right? So choose your poison and know that if we failed to do what we were supposed to in the building of this setting, if our stone is really beautifully laid out and our facets are exactly opposite each other, the way they're supposed to be when it's a well-cut stone, and we've got our prongs a little off center, we're going to have this, right? So the steps that we failed to do well in an earlier stage are going to show in the setting. And as in all things design, a little bit off will look wrong to any consumer. A lot off looks intentional. Like if we wanted to do something abstract and we wanted to have this as our setting, we did a 3-prong setting, people would be like, that's so cool, that's so innovative, that's new, that's exciting. Yeah, but as soon as you just go a little bit off because you've done it badly, they see it. The eye catches it, right? So with that in mind, we'll see how good my alignment was on my stones. And it's one of the easiest things to forget at this stage because you're like, I'm so close, I can taste the finish line. And on my stone, I do happen to have the little facet and then the larger facet combo. So I have two choices. I can do a very low prong on my tiniest facet, or I can do a slightly more consequential prong on one of the larger facets. Let me try to draw for you what the pattern is that I specifically have, so you guys will know what I'm saying. Let's see if I can model this a little bit. So I have my circle, and then I have, except it's going to be an even number, so I don't have it quite perfectly. But then from there, I also have the little facets coming off of it. Yeah, and then so there's the bigger ones, or there's the little guys, and I can choose either, but I want to use my judgment on whether the little ones feel like enough material to hold things in. Factors that influence that are, am I using a thinner gauge prong or a heavier gauge prong? If it's a heavier gauge prong, I can get away with this. It just needs enough that it's not going to peel up on me. But if I'm using a thinner gauge, that may guide me towards going a little further up and in, like I'll be able to get on a larger facet. So choose wisely based on your specific stone cut. I'm going to go larger for the sake of giving me the chance to give you something visual that we can do some fun prong cuts with if we decide to. Because what I'll probably do is make this into a sampler for the prong settings. So I think John wants us to rough trim these before we push them down. We're going to skip ahead to, because he goes into the setting by burr. We're going to skip ahead a little bit to the half setting, securing the stone, half setting the prongs on page 105. And this would be the time where he'd want me to have a pusher that is made of a toothbrush, which I don't happen to have handy. So instead, I'm going to pull out something that John does not usually use for no particular reason. I think I asked him, but it's one that has, no, that's not it. Where's my prong setting pusher? Bear with me a sec, guys. I got to find one tool amidst many that look the same. Ah, there we go. Okay. So you can make or buy a version of a pusher that just has a little divot that cut down the middle. I don't know if that's showing well. Yeah, there we go. So it's just got a divot that the prong would rest in, so that you have something that supports it left, right as you're pushing. Even with these, you're going to want to blunt them on your Tripoli or some other cutting compound. This is still very sharp. But again, you can also make something out of a toothbrush. I just forgot to bring one down to modify today. And so he doesn't mention that he wants us to trim it beforehand. I just have an awful lot of material on this, so I'm going to trim it enough to be out of the way, and get them a little bit more equal.
So Rachel,
Yep.
at what point do you use the burr?
So that's a separate approach to what we've just done. I'm going to do that on the smaller stone.
Okay. Okay.
So this, again, he's showing us, just like he did in earlier chapters where he showed us 2 different ways to achieve the same ends. He first shows us how to do it by hand,
Yeah. Mhm.
and then he shows us how to do it by set by burr, knowing that it's easier to do that with a round setting than not. And I don't have any setting burrs that are whatever this is, probably 10 or 12 millimeter stone. So I have to do this one by hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Rachel,
Or-
when
Yep.
you're trimming back, are you cutting straight parallel to the table?
I am, but it doesn't much matter because we're going to trim a lot more away once we've got them positioned.
Okay,
Yeah, you don't try to shape the final shape of the prong until you've got it in place, basically. So what I now need to do is make sure I'm lined up with one of those larger facets on my prongs. We'll see whether the combination of my setting and the stone equates to it's centered well on a large prong, a large facet in each position that I'm in. It does. That's kind of miraculous. And we're now going to do our first push down. This is the half setting that he describes. Let's see if we can get this exactly where I want it. Again, if you were just practicing, you might want to put one of those tabs on it. And this is an in and over activity to the half set, just enough to bend it into place. And then we're going to do the opposite side. So that north, south, east, west stuff that we've been doing on our step bezels is critical to this process too. It's always push from one side, push from the other, because it's going to tip more one way or the other if you don't do it equally around. And because this is sliding around on me, I'm just confirming that I'm lined up with the facet that I want to be lined up with before I go to the east-west. It's really slippery. And now we're at the half set point. And we want to do a double check to see whether we're equidistant or whether it's tipping. In my case, and I'm not sure, it's a subtle enough thing, I'm not sure you guys will see it. Let me try the other camera and see if it shows. In my case, I have pushed more on this side than I have on this side. So I see a little bit of a lift right here that I don't have over here. Before I go further, I want to push that one down a little bit and try to equalize these. If it's really off, John describes that you want to pull the prong back on the one that's pushing too far down, get it straightened out, and then reset your prong. You don't want to do that over and over again because each time you do it weakens the prong. We're hardening the prong every time we make a bend to it, so it starts to get more fragile. But in this case, it's probably enough that I just need to push a little bit more on that side to get this a cleaner fit. So still part of my phase 1 of the push down is to try to even things out.
And can you change camera?
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. So all I'm doing is just keeping an eye on all the prongs and seeing how they are fitting. And one of them is a little further away than the others. So again, in and over on this push. Because if we just push from the top, what we're going to get is a curve over with a gap. And we really want the in and over. And I see that on one of my prongs, I did a little bit worse job of the up and over, and it's probably the one that's causing this lift.
So
Yeah.
when you're pushing in, are you touching the stone?
Ultimately, yes. I mean, you're not shoving up against the stone, but you're trying to get so that it abuts the, what you're doing is the place that we did with the round is what's going to tuck in against the girdle. And then the over is what folds the rest of it over the top of the stone. So in is for getting it to that junction of the curve spot. And then over is the hit the angle. Did that make sense with my hand gestures, or do I need to draw that one?
Yes, no, that's great. Thank you.
So I'm feeling a little happier about how it's sitting now. And I've got a fairly good base set. And on page, let's see, we got the half setting. Oh, so I want to point out a discrepancy in his language on the top of page 105 versus the caption on the bottom picture on 105. So in describing using the bezel pusher, he describes that it should be pushed forward and upward in a smooth, swift motion. But down at the bottom, it says lean against it with a slow, even pressure. So I don't know whether we're supposed to go slow or fast. So I went kind of medium. You guys try it. I find that if I go too fast, I'm more inclined to slip, but that may be because I'm using one of these metal ones. I have a feeling that the toothbrush mod is probably a little less risky to the setting. And so you can probably push a little faster. I think even though he does a flat fronted toothbrush, I'd probably still put one of these little divots in my toothbrush because I just really like the control it gives me in pushing against. So you're stopping when it's about halfway down. What does he mean by that? So it means that we're not getting the entire flat line. We're getting to the just starting to touch down point. In fact, I may have gone further than he wants on this setting. And that may have been why I was having trouble with it wanting to slip a little bit to the side. The other thing that he points out is a mod you can make to your bench pin, which I've already done, which is to notch in a little position. Oops, I guess you guys need to be able to see this a little better. Come back here. Sorry for the wobblies. So I've just taken a file, and you can either use a round file or you can use a barrel burr and just carved in a prong width mechanism notch that you can put in. It doesn't have to be too deep. You don't want it to because it's going to bump up against the setting anyhow. And this will give you something that you can push against as you're pushing in to give yourself a more even. That I forgot that step, and that may have added to why I was getting an up and over tipping to one side. But this will give you a little bit of support opposite the push that you're doing. Okay. So consider doing that mod to your bench pin. And if you're lefty, obviously do it on the other side. And then let's see. Another thing he mentions in this is that we could do this with pliers. He uses chain nose pliers. I have on a prong setting, I've never been able to get that controlled enough. I really slip when I'm trying to push opposite each other. But what he's basically describing is that we would take, where are my chain noses? we'd basically take the settings opposite each other and push them towards one another. Or use one as a fulcrum and bend down towards it. And I personally, I can't control the slippage on that. I might do a modification to these like we did to one half of our tweezers, and then I have an opposite facing slot that I can grip it with. But frankly, I just don't feel comfortable with that level of lack of control on my part. What else? Then we go on to, so that was the lever action.
Well, he really emphasizes that you're setting it for a half set.
He does, and then he doesn't actually give us a lot of detail about the final set. Because what we have to do is figure out our prong shape, and then we're going to do the last of the trim and push. And he doesn't give us a whole lot of when he wants that done, is what I realize. So I tend to, once I have it well positioned, when I'm happy with what I should have done from slightly higher opening, I tend to trim back at that point, because then I'm not worrying about scraping up the prongs. So this is the point where our modified barrette file comes into play. So I'm going to pull out my barrette file, which I've already modified a different way, but I'm going to use it as the one that I modify the way he wants to. So on the barrette file, this mod came from Charles Luton Brain. He showed me how to do it. Basically, in good quality files, not cheap steel, you can grind down a whole lot of the back material to give yourself a much thinner profile on the file itself, which gets you into tiny places. This is super handy when you're doing things like filing a little bit in a tiny box clasp or something like that, because you still have the length and strength of the file, but you've gotten rid of the majority of it. This is done on a grinding wheel or on a bench grinder, and then finished off with a Tripoli and or other cutting compound polish. But what that doesn't do is, unless I've specifically attended to the edges, it doesn't get rid of the ever so slightly grainy edge where the cut of the actual face comes to the edge. And so if I were to just keep doing this on the edge, I would file a little notch. It'd be a very slow file because it's not full filing material. But what we want to do now is clean up both edges. And the reason for that is that we're going to be putting those edges potentially up against our stone. So this is straight up back to our grinding. And you'll need to remember to dry things off after you've done this, because it's steel and we don't want it to rust. But just starting with a heavy grit in position. There we go. We're just working the side of each side of the file, making sure to get all the way out to the tips, because we'll be using a lot of it, until we don't have that grab you with your teeth, with the teeth when you run your fingernail down it. Back this. It's a little hard to grip such a tiny file this way, but work it for a while and you'll get there. That's feeling good. So I'm doing a little bit of a lift to make sure I get the very front of the file as well as the back. So sort of a rocking motion as I do the sanding. And then once I'm happy with that I'm not playing catch on the edges, I'm going to go a step further and bring you over to my polishing wheel, which we don't get to see this camera a whole lot. But I've just got a cutting compound on here. You're not going to be able to hear me talk while this is going because I'm far away from the mics and it'll be loud. But all I'm doing is using...
What kind of cutting? Okay.
I'm using Tripoli But you could also use a gray star, anything that is a mild cutting compound. And then I'm just using a regular cotton buff. So what you couldn't see on screen is that the way that I tested for doneness is I ran it again. Oops, I'm not on the right screen yet. Is I ran it against my pant leg to make sure it didn't catch. So at the first pass, I got a little bit of catch up at the top. I just want it super smooth. If you want to be really precise, you're going to find a piece of silk and make sure it doesn't catch on silk. That'll make sure that you've got it soft enough that it's not going to do real harm to anything except for your softest stones. Again, this is a risk against, say, a malachite or an opal or something like that, no matter what, because it's still metal. And so it's still harder by a fair amount than those. Ideally, you'd go and soap and water clean this and dry it off. I am not going to take the time to do that while you guys are sitting and watching on screen. But you just want to degrease whatever you've used as your material for that. And then we're going back to the bench, and now we're looking at 107, the 4 basic shapes, where he talks about the prongs. So the 2 approaches that he has to cutting your prongs down are snips, the way that I did when I first did it, or you can saw into it. The sawing technique takes nerves of steel, is what I'll say. Because you want to cut just far enough that you don't run the saw blade against the stone, but far enough that you can then flick the piece off and burnish away the little scrap. So I tend to do my trim up with a really good pair of fine flush cut pliers if I can, but you're also going to want to decide what the look is going to be like. So the most basic prong that is done is just a cup burr, which I'll do on one of these, or maybe I'll do it on the other setting when we get to it, where you're just putting a cup burr over this end and burnishing it till it's rounded, basically. And it looks really elegant, but it's also the most basic and simple look. Another one that he shows us is a triangular cut, which is, or a knife cut, it's sometimes called, which is just shaping this prong into a point. And that's what we need this for. I'm actually kind of happy with the heights of these. There's just a little trim up I need to do to make them more equal. I have one that's a little shorter than everybody else, so we'll trim these other guys back.
So that's the barrette file that you are going to use?
The barrette file is what I'm going to use to shape one of the prongs to be the triangle one, and then I'll do a couple different shapes so you guys can see these. Let's see, I'm going to do, I think it's going to be longer. Yeah, I'm going to leave 2 of them long. Okay, so the first one I'm going to do is a triangle, and it is a very careful filing of the point. Trying not to catch the stone. So slow and steady wins the race on this. See if I'm succeeding, if I have polished my piece as well as I think I have. And this is where we get into awkward grips, especially as your settings get smaller. if you're really good with your snips, you can sometimes pre-shape the material.
So Rachel,
Yeah,
would this be a situation I have seen where someone puts it like plexi and like Gorilla Glue or carpet tape, and then you
they
can
put it on the
manipulate
stone.
on the bottom so that you
Oh,
don't have
just
to
to
hold
hold
it?
it down. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you can if it works for you, or on a piece of wood or something. Like I could put it on the end of something and work it. That would probably not be a bad call. For
Okay.
me, I need to, it's between my eyesight and my hand coordination, I like to be up close to my work and sort of feel it. But you're right, absolutely. If you can stabilize this in a way that you can still get to it, I just can't like attach it to a flat surface and easily position and change the rotation I need. You could even put it in your block, your engraver's ball, if it
Yeah.
has something to connect to.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now-
whatever works for you is the real answer. For me, I just need to be close enough to see what I'm doing.
Okay, so what if you slip? If you scratch the stone, how would you polish it? Would you put tape first of all to begin with? Or if you put it,
So the challenge with putting tape so close to a prong is that mostly you're just going to end up scratching up the tape until it's out of the way. That's why we do the high polish on the edges of these. If you really badly scratch a stone, you're going to either need to choose to take it out and have it repolished. If you're good with your jewel tool or something like that, you might be able to do it yourself. Or if it's your grandma's diamond, you're going to take it to somebody who's a pro. It's one of the, I am not a fixer of stones, so I try to not hurt them in the first place. And also start with hard stones when you're practicing this. Because what I'm doing is I'm not getting a whole lot right up at the stone. I'm really working from the side. And so it's showing a lot of the dust, but what you want is to be forming the last of this. And then we're going to do that final push down. So it's not truly right up against the stone. It's just resting above it. And therefore we don't have to do a whole lot touching the stone itself. I'm not sure that's helpful to you, but the answer is really, if you can avoid it, don't scratch the stone in the first place.
yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. You have to be extra careful.
And if you're finding you're having real hard time, getting these, once you're at that halfway point, maybe back off and just be very precise with your measuring and do a little more of your shape, like pre-shape your prong before you do quite even the full phase one push down. And then all you're doing is touching up. So what I'm doing here is shaping from the left and the right. And then making sure that I clean up whatever I've got for little scraps that creates, because it is definitely creating some scraps. And then I have to remember to shape down the top, which is basically thinning the point at the top of the prong. Let me rinse this off because I can barely see it in the dust. No way you guys will be able to. So even now, that's not going to show for you guys there. Let me bring it over to the other camera. Even now, what I'm getting on this prong that I'm shaping, let me show you, is that because I'm being so cautious about not touching the stone, I'm nicely shaping the top, but I've got this little bit right down near the stone that is hanging on, and I need to get braver and cut in there and get that material out of the way. Some of it I may be able to pry away, either with this pick, or I could go in with an X-Acto blade carefully. I think John mentions he likes to use a razor blade, straight razor blade for some of this cleanup. But yeah, I need to file in a little bit more right there to take it away. Which just means I have to suck it up and get in close. I think this is a smoky quartz I'm working on. When I first picked it, I thought it was blue, but it's got more brown to it than I realized. So who the heck knows how easily it will scratch on me.
So how can you tell if it's a CC?
I can't. That's the answer.
Okay.
Did this
Alright.
person that sold it to you tell you it was a C? I think there are refractory lines that show up in CZs that don't show up in other similar color stones. But
Okay.
I am not a GIA anything. I've never studied it. I can't retain that kind of material in my brain, no matter how much I want to.
I mean, it's so inexpensive when it is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to go digging for my X-Acto because this really does feel like a situation where I need to just pry this one little scrap of metal up, figure out where I stored my X-Acto the last time I used it. Give me a moment. Because I don't tend to keep straight razor blades just hanging around. But I do tend to keep X-Actos usually. Usually, I say, waiting for my X-Acto to appear. It's actually in the X-Acto box. That would be novel. It is actually in the X-Acto box. Fantastic. All right, so I'm just going to take the blade of the X-Acto and very carefully try to pry up not the prong itself, but just this scrap of metal that is so thin it just won't get caught when I'm filing. There we go. Get out of the way. You on that side. So I'm managing to just lift it up enough where it is hanging on that I should now be able to get in and clean it up with the edged file. Okay, so I have now cut one in at what I would call a triangular or wedge shape. So the second image down that he gave us, which again, I'll see if I can get this close enough that you guys can see it. A little more light down here. So let's see. Let's see, zooming out. Back in gives us some better focus. So this is the one that I've shaped, and all I did was file along the sides and file along the top. And it just cleans up and gives it a nice pointing towards the center of the stone shape as we finish that one up. The difference between this and what he calls the wedge shape is instead of having, oops, I'm out of screen, sorry. Instead of having that curve into the triangle that I've got built into this one. So this one I smooth up and over. The wedge, he sort of flattens the top a little bit more and blocks it instead of triangles it. So it's got a narrowing, but it sort of squares off at the ends. And I don't know that you guys necessarily need to see me file each version of these, but can I do a split with one of these? I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try and do a split for you guys. Deborah, on the smaller mini files, the answer is the mini files that are, when I say mini files, I usually mean these, the little jeweler's files that come from Eurotool. So they're the 4-inch. But if you can find smaller, please do. Did I miss anybody else's questions? No, looks like that was it. Okay. So the split, which we'll do on the opposite side. What are we going to do the split? I need enough of a top material. I'm going to do the split on this one because I left myself a little extra. Even this out a little bit and file it a little flat at the top. And this is probably the thinnest gauge that I would attempt a split cut, but that's because my sawing skills are less than adequate for tiny, tiny work. You may have different mileage. Your mileage may vary. So I'm creating a surface that I can saw into, and I'm going to use, I don't know if he gave us a saw blade width. Wedge shape chisel. Give us a saw. I don't think he gave us a size of blade, but less is more on this one. So I'm going to actually switch to, if I have it, I'm going to switch to an 8/0, which is the tiniest one that I ever have in my possession. I may only have a 7/0. 7/0. Yeah, I have a 7/0. So super, super fine blade, because all we really want to do is put a single slit in the middle of our prong, our teeny tiny little prong. And the goal on this one is, again, you don't want to take it deep down into the prong itself. You want to have it as a surface level decorative element at the top of the prong. So I'm going to try marking out a line for myself. Teeny tiny little prong. Yeah, even my pen is too thick for this. So all I'm doing here, and again, whenever we're using the saw near the stone, our goal is to go only part way through, is really, really carefully and slowly and gently splitting the top of the prong. Stopping frequently to make sure you're not getting too close to the stone. Because on this one, you have to actually get through to make the split happen, but you want to go not even a single saw blade further when you do. So you'll notice that I'm supporting everything. I'm supporting my thumb to hold my saw blade at a steady angle relative to the rest of it. I'm holding the stone firmly, the setting. And yeah, this is definitely bare bones minimum material. I would want to do a split. But it just looks so cool when you do it. And I'm going to rotate and try to go from the other side because I'm getting nervous about the angle. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Let's see if stone lets me work that way. close enough to split. I just can't see it. Let's find out. Nope, still not through. So I'm taking the X-Acto, which what did I down? Taking the X-Acto and just testing every once in a while to see if I'm through and I'm just getting in my own way. And I am in this case. There's just some material left from the cut in between the two halves of the prong.
Without hitting the X-Acto on the stone.
So I'm having to put the X-Acto on the stone very carefully because I need to get through enough to pry them apart. But yeah, you don't want to be putting the tip scraping the stone if you can avoid it, because that will in fact scratch things. So I'm more using it as a pry, and I suppose I don't actually need a sharpened X-Acto blade for this. What I need is the leverage of it. So you could dull down your X-Acto blade before you use it this way to give yourself a little bit more control over it. So this is a very sloppy split so far. I'm going to need to take my cleaned up barrette file and do a little work on it. And I still definitely have some material in the center that I'm going to need to pry out of there, I think. So if you're going to do one of this kind of prong, consider going a little bit higher up the stone, because by splitting it, you're weakening a little bit of the support. And you want the extra material to work with because you're going to want to clean this up. Because right now mine looks like a messy snake head, or snake tongue rather.
You mean don't cut the prong back as far as you did? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I left myself a little too, I didn't think ahead to what I wanted to do with this prong. So I left myself a little less material to do. I would like to do more filing and cleanup. Hang on a sec, I'll bring it over to the bench and you'll see what I mean, because it's sort of messy right now. And if I had a little more meat on the end of the set of the prong, then I could have given myself a little more leeway to work with it. So see how I've just basically split it?
Yeah,
But
cool.
it is cool. It just takes a lot of precision. And this one's very messy. I would want to have enough material that I can really control the shaping of each of the prongs. But it adds this bling that makes it just a little different than a basic prong. And remember, you could also have done a similar but different effect by, instead of putting a single wire as your prong in the first place, you could have soldered together a pair of wires and run them up as a set and then saw down the middle of the two wires so that you've actually got a double prong. You could have done some fancier wire. You could have done some half round wire, and then the half round you split down the middle and you bend one way and one the other way. So there's lots of variations on that concept that you can play with. And he's given us 4 of the most common in the book. So I'm going to, rather than torture you guys with me trying to file that clean when I don't really have enough material, I'm going to pause there and see if you have questions. I recommend making a big stone and doing that, like different prongs on each of the 4 things so that you can play around with the way that they look relative to each other on the same stone. And then you can use it as a showpiece to say, what kind of prong would you like, customer? And give them what you want for style. And just a little change makes a lot of difference to that setting. So now I'm going to do a little push down on those settings. I would come through and finish the other two before I did this next step. But we want to do our final push once we've got everything cleaned up and shaped. If I can figure out where I put that setter. And so the prongs that I've cleaned up, I'm going to push one more bit in and over. Again, trying to keep equal pressure from each side so it doesn't try to lift up and over, and up and over. Okay. Again, I'd have gone in and really filed in all of that. And I would come through and do a pass with my Swifty wheel around all of it. And the test is right now, that thing I just did with the split is really rough. If I can catch it again on a piece of silk or on my jeans or something like that, then it's not down far enough, or it hasn't been filed and neatened far enough. So this one needs some blunting at the end, and then I would put the Swifty wheel on it. And this needs a whole heck of a lot of filing because where I sawed is really rough still. And so that all needs cleaning up before I finish the setting up. What I'm looking for, and I'm only happy with 3 of my prongs pushed down, is that it is truly up against and over. I have one setting, which to me again points to me having made this like 0.25 millimeter too big of a circle at the base, because on this particular prong, it's setting a little farther away than I want it to be from the stone. And I'm not sure that that's correctable at this point. Let me see if I can get that in any further without radically shifting the way it sets. Yeah, it's a little better, but it's really not setting quite down the way I want it. I want a good clean fit into where I cut the round cut. That's where I want my girdle to set. And I want it to be butted right up against there. And then I want the rest that I filed off to be right flush up against the facet of the stone. And I've done a pretty good job of hitting my facets. I've just got that 1, 2 that are not sitting right up against. And again, that tells me, and I can actually see it when I look from above, there's ever so slightly a hint of the upper bearing that peeks out beyond my stone. I made it ever so slightly too big. So watch for those things earlier than I did in this process, and hopefully you can correct before you get to that stage. Questions about that so far before we move on to doing the same deal only with a burr?
No.
Okay. On to our tiny little guy, and we'll try that sideways thing. I want to play with that, see whether that helps me with my control. So let's see what we got in there nice and firmly. And there's my stone for this little guy. Good thing this is a CZ that I have lots of, because I've managed to misplace the CZ that I had pulled. Where are you, little guy? Right, we'll have another one. So I'm going with orange instead of green. So once again, we want to see how the stone fits, and you want to make sure, I forgot to mention this on our last setting because it was a little more already fitted, but you want to double check that you're actually equally upright and snugged up against. So our little grid that the little circles that we were using to tell us that we were still in alignment can help us with this. We can check to make sure that we still line up. We can eyeball it if you're good at that. But what I want to start with is all my prongs as pointed upright as I can. And right now I can see that a couple of these have gotten a little distorted. So perpendicular to each other, or parallel rather, I guess it's perpendicular to some and parallel to others. Just making sure they're all upright and all equally in. Like I don't want one splayed way out from the setting. I want them all fairly snug to hold the stone. One of them is giving me a little grief. So when your stone is resting in it, it should be touching your prongs. So if you're seeing it sitting there and it's not touching all of them, then you haven't successfully pushed these in enough equally. Because what we're aiming for is when we mark it with the black marker, we want to see where we are relative to everything else. So I've now got it positioned. I'm going to put my Sharpie mark down because that's still going to give me guidance for when I want to stop. And John describes using a setting burr that is the same diameter as your stone. Whereas a lot of people, so he has two different things. When you are finding a burr, he does point out that the burr is always going to drill ever so slightly bigger than the size of the burr itself, because there's material being taken out of the way. But he also says that for this particular exercise, he uses one that matches the size of the stone or is a quarter size smaller. And most of the people that I've studied stone setting with tell me the quarter to a half a size smaller. So I'm going to err on the side of that, in part because I also think I only have ever so slightly smaller. So if you're using a pair of digital calipers or any good quality calipers, what he recommends we do is we measure it in multiple positions, even if it's a round stone. And you're doing this with the table side down on a flat surface. These being Rio Grande calibrated CZs, I'm hoping that we're in pretty good shape all the way around. But what you want to do is use the smallest measurement you get. That is not what I'm measuring. Yeah. So theoretically, this stone is 5.75. Practically speaking, it seems to be a little smaller at some points. So 5.61. So now I'm going to go to, in my case, I'm using setting burrs. He also describes using heart burrs. Heart burrs are the ones that angle back on themselves and they come in two different angles. Those are the burrs that if you are going to hand cut a setting, but use burrs, meaning if you have an unusual shape or something and you can't just drill down the center, heart burrs are the ones that most people will use if they're cutting by burr individual first cuts into this. Because let me describe the difference in those two and why you would want to think about that. So a setting burr has this profile and a heart burr has some variation of angle of this, the two angles that it has. One is about that and one is a much steeper angle, right? So this is a heart. This is a heart. This is a setting. And the reason why, if you were hand cutting, this one would be challenging is because if we're coming in on a prong from an awkward angle, or if there are prongs really nearby, even if we're using a small setting, this is going to be hard to keep straight in to get the cut in that we're trying to do. Whereas putting a heart burr in there means that we don't have the wall butting up against and possibly cutting into more of our material. So this burr runs like that, and the heart burr runs like that relative to where we're cutting. Oops, did I just draw that all off screen? I did draw that all off screen. I'm sorry, gang.
No, you were fine. You were
Oh, was
okay.
I? Okay. So yeah, that's one of the reasons that people gravitate towards a heart burr if doing individual hand cut by burr settings, or as we just proved, you know, you can do each of your cuts with a set of files by hand. So for now, what we're going to do is try to find the closest match I have to a 5.61 millimeter. It's too small by a fair amount. It's too big. That's too big. See, this would be perfect if my stone were equally round. That's way too small. Of course, I don't have one that's just the right size. Let me see if I was right in my initial measurements, because if not, we're going with that one that's bigger. Nope, it's definitely not 5.75 there. Okay, we're going with a slightly smaller one, and it's going to be a little trickier than I had feared. Oh, wait, I might have another set. Hang on a sec. This is why we go crazy, because there's 0.25 or 0.5 differences on these burrs, depending on the manufacturer, meaning they go up and down in 0.25 millimeter increments or 0.5 millimeter increments. And therefore, we have to buy every bloody one of these very expensive burrs in order to have just the size you need at a point in time when you actually are ready to cut something. Not even close. I think I have something a little more precise. Too small. Way too big. Way too big. Okay, well, we're going to try with the slightly too small, and if that fails me, I'm going to have to switch to the slightly too big. And we'll see if it sets adequately. So, there's my chance. Putting this in, and John has a lovely description of why you should pay more for more expensive burrs. Because there's 3 basic types of burrs of different quality. And they all have different speeds that they need to work with. And I can't remember what type I bought. Oh, of course it doesn't tell me. I bought high quality ones, but I don't know if I bought the top quality. The challenge is that the highest quality you're supposed to use at high speed, and the others you're supposed to use at medium speed. And I didn't mark my box when I ordered it as to which kind I was getting. So I'm going to start with medium speed and hope it doesn't destroy things. He also recommends that that you lubricate this well. And yeah, this is too small. It's not going to reach my prongs. What we're looking for is something that just touches all of the prongs. I'm going to have to go up to the slightly larger size. So it's all well and good that I have calibrated stones, but not if I don't have the matching calibrated burr for the setting process. So this is one that I am unfortunately going to block a lot of what I do, because your mission is to do this as upright as you possibly can. Situated. Am I in screen for you guys at least a little? That visible?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe it's going to be really awkward for me, but we'll see if I can keep it going for you guys. So what we're aiming to do is go straight down into the middle, cutting into our prongs a smidge to create the equivalent of both what we did with the round and what we did with the crossing file. And you'd never start pressed down against your setting. You always want to start from a little bit of ways and then get it going. And this is also going to potentially start creating a better seat in your bearing. And this is still not big enough for me to hit my prongs. I'm sorry, gang, I have to take a closer look from the side to see what I'm hitting and what I'm not. Bear with me a second, I'll be back on camera. Yeah, I'm so barely hitting my prongs that this is not actually taking. So I may have to move up one more size, even though probably means my setting is going to be a little loose on me. We work with what we got. Okay. Yes, that did the trick. Let's see if it's ginormous for the setting. Let me show you what I'm seeing up close. It does go fast, but it goes faster when you have the exactly right burr size, because that's what we're really aiming for. So as before, I had blackened my lines. And it's so subtle that it's going to be hard for you guys to see on camera, I think. But you'll see that one, the black is taken off to a point here, just below, just where I got it. Two, this, because I was using the burr shape that I was using, I set a little bit of a seat. And three, that's the part you're not really going to be able to see. It created, in essence, the profile that we did with the round, except it's a little more angular. It goes straight down, it goes sort of straight down and then angles into the cut that it was doing for me. So it's achieving similar things, just with the burr instead. And now the magic question is, have I got a setting that is now way too big for my stone? Is it going to fit beautifully? So the bonus is it does sit really well in the seat because I've got that nice seat cut now into my bearing. It's definitely a smidge loose. So my prongs just barely are cut in where I need them to be. But this will actually succeed, I think, but I got way more prong than I need. So I'm going to trim a lot of it away. Take a whole lot of it away. And then we'll do our positioning, because the thing we always forget is, besides taking the stone out before you snip, thing we always forget is to make sure that our facets are lined up. Now I got to see where I flung my CZ. Somewhere. Maybe the green one will show up while I'm looking for the orange one I just flung. Or maybe I give up and open the package and get another one out. Way too many tools on my bench right now. Let's see, get some of those out of the way. There's my CDs. Is the orange showing up on camera better than the green was?
I think so.
Okay. Pull an orange one then. They literally come in little pill packs when you order these. So, and there's the other orange one. Oh boy. And the dropsies. All right. So we are once again at the point where we can start doing our half press over. If we wanted to, we could do some more planning for what kind of prong we're setting. Oh my gosh, the CZs are so sparkly that I'm having a hard time figuring out where the facets are to position it. Oh, looks like there's a wide facet. And yes, a lot of people do this by using magnifiers, even a microscope. I'm eyeballing it. That's just how I roll right now. Because I have a hard enough time getting in close enough before I have a microscope in my way. But I'm once again gonna try and push. This is the halfway push, not the full push. So in and over. Whoop, maybe in and over. Come on, little guy. Oh, my goodness. I must have worked hard on this somewhere along the way. This is much harder than the other one. Yep, I gotta get this position better. So the sideways one, the downside is I can't also use the use it up against the block to give myself something to counter push. So I'm going to switch gears. Set myself up. Am I still in screen? Yeah, I am still in screen for you guys. Set myself up in one of those little notches to give myself something to push against. Yeah, there we go. That gives me enough of a fulcrum to get my halfway push. North, south, east, west again. And I'm going to this time get smart and check to make sure that I'm not tipping yet. And I'm not. I just want to even out the amount of push I put on each of those. This side got a little bit more over than the other. Then I'm doing my east-west. One prong that decided to be a lot harder to push than the others. And I don't know why. Just picky, I guess. Okay, so I'm at my halfway. Oops, not that way. And I'm also confirming that I'm not tipping one way or the other. Trying to even out how much my prongs are pushed so that I don't run afoul of that by pushing unevenly again. All right, so I'm rough set, and now is the time to trim and decide what I'm doing with the prongs. On this set, I'm going to trim them back with my snips, and then we're going to use the burr, the cup burr, for the most traditional of settings. And so in this case, I'm trimming them just enough to feel like I'm at the base of the table where I want it to be. And I'm discovering that one of mine is wanting to tip a little bit to one side. So I'm going to try to correct it. That's not the one that's tipping though. This is the one that's tipping. So there's a chance to sort of straighten as you go if you catch it early enough. Because again, the eye will notice a small shift more than it'll notice a big shift. So that was just me cleaning that up on the straightening out. And again, I'm using the table as a guide. Oh, I may have cut that one too short. We'll see. Even these up a little bit more. see what I've done. Okay, so I've got them baseline trimmed. I may have to trim one of them. One of them is being a little bit of a pain in the butt and lying a little flatter than the others, but I'm now going to grab a set of cup burrs, and we are talking about what he's doing on page 108 at this point. So note at the very top, select a burr that fits comfortably over the unshaped prong tip. If too large, but burr is used, it'll cut without contacting the whole area uniformly. And if it's too small, it's going to cut into it. So he's given us the what happens. I always love that John does the worst case scenario drawings as much as he does the best case ones. So just like if I were, say, finishing an earring post or something, finishing an earring wire, I'm going to find one that just fits over my prongs. The challenge is we're doing this up against something, so it's at a bit of an angle. It's a little hard to tell. One size smaller. Except, of course, my prong set, I mean, my bits are out of order. They must have fallen. It's too small. And he also has a little bit of an explanation for us about different types of cuts in the burrs. He recommends, this is where he really recommends we use chalk in them. I think I've got a good size for this. Because they're going to clog up really quickly. Cutting burrs, I mean, excuse me, cup burrs in particular like to clog. I don't happen to have any chalk. I couldn't find it in my sewing kit, which is where I usually keep it. So it may have crumbled to dust since it's been a while since I've done any sewing. We'll just have to let it clog and be careful about it. So, as I said, I like to collect antique tools. This wonderful little burr set I've got is a handmade one from, there was a goldsmith who passed away in Connecticut. And I happened across his ceremony, I mean, you know, like not his ceremony, his daughter's doing his sale, his estate sale. And he had been a famous goldsmith in New York, and the folks that were doing the estate sale, the two daughters, were pretty distraught at how whirlwind artists came through and tore apart what he had. Like they were just mayhem. I got there, I think, probably 3 hours in. And there were only his bench and an antique, like 1800s rolling mill, and a few little things, including that burr box, which I took. And I also told them that if it was any consolation to them, that the tools that I had bought would be going to pass on knowledge to students. And they were very happy to think about that in terms of that their father's legacy and his equipment that he had used for, at that point, something like 50 years was going to be used to continue the art form. So I was glad to give them a little bit of comfort in that regard, since so many people had just swept in like the vultures that we jewelers are when we see good tools. So all I'm doing, and again, I have to get into a really awkward position for this that I would not normally be sitting in order for you guys to see it.
That's funny.
But so awkward position aside, I'm working at an angle on the top of the cut that I've made and doing a little tiny bit of rotation just to get all of it. If you do too wide of a rotation, you're going to start cutting into the sides of your prong. But if you get just a tiny little bit of rotation on the end of it there, and I definitely cut one of my prongs shorter than I should have, you'll get a nice clean finish to the end of the prong. Yeah, this one needs a little cleared up. Hang on a sec. Trim away some excess. Feel a little bit like Goldilocks. I don't recommend sitting chatting with your, what do we have, 13 or 14 people, your 14 closest friends while trying to set stones. I recommend a little more concentration and you'll get neater results. But again, you can see I'm just doing the most minute of rotations when I do that. To get a little knob on the end of each prong. It's still a little bit taller than the rest. If you need to, you can do a little filing down before you go through this exercise to get everything even. I have done a mediocre job of evening these out. Okay, and I'm going to do another bit of touch-up pushing from that halfway point to fully pushed. Still keeping the habit of north, south, east, west. Yep, and I'll have an example for you guys of where I overcut with my spin. I managed to push too far. Yeah, so small. So all along through this, I'm also checking to make sure that I'm actually successfully tightening the stone into place, because otherwise we defeat the purpose. And what I have is that prong that was giving me problems at the first, that didn't want to bend as much as the others, is keeping this a little looser than I want. Up and over with you. Let's see how that looks. Oof, this is a little bit sloppy for my taste. But I'm going to rinse this off and show you in the close-up camera what that effect is. You're going to excuse the ever so slightly off-center setting that I've got because I managed to mark up one beyond what I meant to. Come on, focus. Out of focus. There we go. Okay, so that little bit of ball burr action gave us a nice, round, consistent finish. Relatively consistent, barring the one that, because I was not paying enough attention, I over circled and cut back in onto the prong. So it is a precision thing. You're going to just do that tiniest of rotations, or else you end up cutting with the edge of the cup burr back into your prong. But otherwise, like these three have a nice look. This one is mangled, and that's why you can see it's canted off to one side because I weakened the prong there. So when you are playing with your settings, make yourself a few I would suggest doing a few in the same size stone, and try these variations. It's another good reason to get the CZs. You can get a bunch out of the way inexpensively. And you can play and see what you do like and get your control down on doing things like those prong finishings, filing, and so on. Thank you, Paula, for this pin that you mentioned. Sorry, you guys distract me with occasionally neat things. This pin is my body autonomy project, which I will show on screen so that you guys can actually see it. And it is a fundraiser item that I do, that I split the income between Planned Parenthood and ACLU. And there's 3 different sizes, and 100% of the proceeds goes to them. So anyway, but that's me. That's my thing.
great.
Questions? Yep.
It's great. It's a great pin.
Oh, thank
Just wanted
you.
to let you know.
Thank you. Questions about what we have just done for setting 2 different ways. I feel like I'm on those cooking shows. Chicken prepared 2 ways. Cup setting, prong settings prepared 2 ways. Questions about any of those things, the hand filing, the burr file, I mean, hand setting, the burr setting, how we're finishing things off at the top. I'm definitely going to make a bunch more examples because these are awful. I finished them in haste and I shouldn't have. Anything on those?
So Rachel, did
I-
you find one easier or not as difficult as the other?
So I don't actually compare the 2 approaches because they really are necessary each for their own situation. Obviously cutting something in with a burr is a whole heck of a lot faster than cutting in with by hand, but it also has a very limited set of controls to it until you get, unless you have much better motor control than I do to cut individual seats with your setting, which there are definitely people out there. There are people who have trained for years and are really good at that. And there are other instructors who specialize in that kind of setting. So go and seek out other ways to do it. But from my perspective, speed doesn't always outweigh precision. And I needed many more tools, even though it didn't seem like it, on the burr setting, because I have to have a burr in the right size for everything, right? So that's expensive. Like, these burrs are not cheap. And you can buy them individually if you know you're working with a size, but if your stones aren't always exactly precisely calibrated, it's not always good enough for what you need. And for me, that counters the speed. That said, the tinier I work, the more I'd want to do it with a proper burr, because I'm clumsy. Like, getting my files into the tinier and tinier ones is going to be harder for me. But I always want to know how to do it by hand, because I won't always have the perfect burr and other tools.
Yeah, yeah, I would totally agree with that then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it, at least you can do it by hand versus having to get all the different sizes. Yeah,
Right.
true.
Right.
Thank
So I
you.
would still try both. But again, if you want to start out small on the costly burrs, like, I think they're in the good ones, are in the hundreds of dollars for a full set of every size from 2 millimeter on up, kind of thing. And even the medium quality ones are pretty pricey. So if you're not buying individual ones to practice with, rather, I would buy individual ones and the stones I think they will match up with to practice with. Decide if you like that enough to go buy the expensive batch of burrs. That's kind of the way I'd go. Yeah. And go shopping at tag sales and stuff, because burrs are one of those things that we all hold on to forever. Theoretically, there are ways to resharpen them. My time is more valuable spent on other things, is where I put it. Any other questions on these settings?
I was glad that you did the filing of the barrette file.
Yep.
You know, they talk about it and how to dress it. And I never quite got it down. So thank you for doing that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So tool mod is one of those things that I came to late in life. I was always like, there's tools made for it. Why do I need to do stuff? And then I had an instructor about 15 years ago, the one that really got me started back on jewelry after I'd been away from it. And she's like, here's a nail. And I think I've shown you guys my setting nails. She rocked my world with that setting nail. And it made me start being more aware of the ways that professional jewelers are modifying their tools, and not to be afraid of it, because a tool out of the box as manufactured isn't always the right one. If you get into that conversation with Tevel at Allcraft, plan on spending an hour on the phone, because he talks about how the hammers are not finished in the way that you need them, and he has to pay people to special finish them for him. And if he says he has an option for somebody to professionally finish something for you, take him up on it. So there's all, anything that improves the tool before you even lay hands on it is great. And the other thing is I have small hands, relatively speaking. I mean, they're strong hands, but a lot of tools were made for men's hands and are bigger. So one of my reasons for not using anything other than the traditional German saw is that most of the modern ones have these huge handles that really stress my hand out. The grip on them is awful for me. I like the simple, clean lines. But if you like more of a grip, you can also use the stuff that we've been using as our Thermalock or one of the other jet set type tools and build your handle out, or wrap it with tape the way that tennis players do. Use tennis tape. Modify your tools. Don't be afraid to do that. And if you are concerned about it, buy some inexpensive tools and mod them first as your prototypes and go from there. So yeah, it's going to help you throughout. Other questions on the settings? All right, we are at 6:50. I am happy to start on the basics of the pair setting, prong setting, and go for about 20-25 minutes before we do show and tell, or we can pause here and just start that, not at our next session, which isn't going to happen, but 4 weeks from now when we have our actual next session, because I'm taking a break for actual travel. Preferences, anybody strongly against me starting the pear-shaped one? You guys fried from what I did today so far?
I think I'm fried.
You're fried. Do we have any other votes for fried?
I say go for it.
Okay, I've got one of each. I need tiebreakers. How many folks do we have on? 11?
I'm gonna break your tie, I think. I think if you start it, how
Yeah.
far can you get? Because we might forget in a month's time.
True. That's true. Because we have the longer break, it'll be a little awkward to switch it out. Okay. That is a good reason to tie break. Wendy, you're going to have to wait for your teardrop setting. However, what I will try to do is do 2 settings the next time we meet, if we have enough time. I think we'll probably be able to try either the pair and either marquee or the pair and a trillion, which, because Carmen got some gorgeous stones recently, has got me thinking about trillions. So I don't have a
I would
whole
love
lot.
for you to do them.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to do all the shapes no matter what. It's whether we can get 2 baskets done in one setting, in one session rather. Because I don't know that we really need to set our 3-pronger on camera because it's the same principles as before. So other than that, I still have a couple of those ones that I had to re-glue. I don't have a whole lot in our backlog of setting, and I'm not going to have time to catch up on the couple of stones settings that I still owe you guys from chapter 3, which I need to do because I'm going to conquer that emerald setting if it's the death of me. All right, anybody got anything exciting to show? Yeah, trillion is definitely coming in. Trillion is my favorite faceted cut. And therefore I will happily do that. I have large trillions, I have small trillions. I have so many trillions in my collection. Yes, in answer to the question, when is the next session? The next session is going to be 9/21. We will not have a 9/7 session. And in that session, we are going to, we're now going to pick up with the pair setting, which you'll note in the book is a combo of a wire prong and a sheet prong. It's one of my favorites that John has shown because it's a really elegant look. It could be all prongs if you wanted to set your pair that way. That's doable. It just adds a little extra oomph to have it in the blended style. So I'm picking that one to do the blended style. He's also got some drawings of a marquee that is a combo, which has the sheet on the ends and then some added prongs, which you don't need the overkill for the sake of holding the stone. But again, looks super cool, gives a little extra bling to it. Think about, in the next month, think about the kinds of variations you could do on this. What happens if you do gold on the ends of a marquee and silver for your prongs, or switch it up? What happens if you do square wire instead of round, if you do half round? play with some of these variations. And again, really maybe start with bigger stones, because it's going to be a lot easier to see all the moving parts and get the fiddly soldering as you get going, and work your way down in size. And pick up some of those.
Did
CDs.
Carmen get CZ trillions? Where did she get her?
What did you,
Brilliant.
so I didn't know what stones you got. I just saw that they were gorgeous colors. You want to show us what you got?
Mhm.
Let me take me off of spotlight.
Oh, boy. I don't know what I
The
did. with
colors made me
them.
jealous is all I know.
The stones. I'm sorry. I think I have to do it next time. I'm
Okay.
actually out of town, but I
Oh.
posted. Yeah, they're a friend of mine who sold her building. She had a jewelry business, and I got some really beautiful citron, amethyst,
Oh, nice.
peridot. Yeah, some really cool stones.
And the ones that
Yeah.
killed me was the set of 3 different really deep colors that you had that were just stunning. So we'll get to see
Yeah,
them in
thank you.
action.
Thank
Anybody
you.
have other show and tell, either these kinds of projects or some of the earlier ones? All right. It's the heat of summer. Everybody's getting to the end of summer and slowing down. I need a break so I can catch up with myself. I have so many behind projects. It's kind of ridiculous. But I will see you hopefully bright and refreshed from some travel on 9/21, and make some stuff between
Actually,
now and the whole month.
I can
Oh,
show you I'm sorry, but I can show you the little one I brought with me.
Sure. Let me spotlight you so we can all see.
Oh,
Lift up.
no,
Ooh,
you can't really
Uh-uh.
see.
those colors are killer. So that looks, what's the orange one? Do you know? Is that is it citrine and then yellow lemon quartz or something? Lift
Oh,
up.
it's so hard to show you.
Is that a citrine? It's a deep orange if it is, or it has a sunstone or something.
The
I'm not
specified?
sure. I need to ask her,
Ooh.
but the citrine is this yellow one, right?
Okay. Spessartine garnet, you might be right about that. Was that Deborah that said? Somebody said. That's
Wendy.
pretty. Wendy, yeah, good call, possibly. Beautiful.
I'm sorry, but I can't really show you right.
It's okay.
But
Yeah. That pops.
Beautiful.
You're gonna have
I'm
some fun.
that's better.
salivating. I'm drooling.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I can
and
connect you with her. I mean, she closed her jewelry and she's got a ton of them.
Wow. Yeah.
nice.
Connect me, please.
Okay.
Put it in the
Anybody,
chat. Maybe on
anybody
the
have anything else they
Facebook
want to
one.
share before we call it?
Thank you.
Gang, thank
Amazing
you.
class. I'm
Good.
really looking forward to trying it.
Excellent. I am gonna, that's the other thing I forgot. We're gonna have an adjustment to the dates of the Bezel's Less Ordinary November class. It's probably moving forward a week. I'm gonna send out to the people that are already registered the definitive. I'm still trying to juggle what's gonna make the least disruption for the people that are already registered. But if you're interested in that, again, that is taking some of a few settings that aren't in the book at all. Like I do a tab setting in that, and also some of the primarily step bezel variations and how to fancy them up. And so we'll cover a few different things, and I'm going to send out materials lists and stuff after I'm traveling. That's one of my to-do lists when I'm sitting someplace peaceful and can make sure I narrow down the scope of what I want to do in that class to something that will actually get done. But we're going to talk about how to add decorative elements using gallery wire and using files and saws to modify things in ways that still leave structural material behind, and all kinds of options that you have on that. And then probably do a little bit of playtime with some other settings altogether. So that is still available for registration if you're interested, but know that the dates that are on there are going to shift some week or 2 weeks, one direction or the other.
And Rachel, you know, what I told you is I'm good on any of those. So whatever.
Yep.
But
Yeah, I
yeah,
have to just pick
But it
that.
was the 11th that I double booked. So yeah, I'm
Yep.
glad you're changing it.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm getting into the show that weekend, but I'm still hoping I will. I've done it a few times and I'm hoping to get into it another time. It's one of the few West Coast right near Christmas shows. For whatever reason, the East Coast jams them all up around the holidays and the West Coast puts them all in spring and summer. And so got to get the business when I can. That's what it comes down to. So thank you for your flexibility to the folks that are registered.
Your booth looked fabulous. I love
Thank
the
you.
way your booth, yeah, it
I-
really looked really good.
I'm pretty excited. I got to get some better photographs of it because I'm terrible at photographing my own space. But my real hope is there's a couple of big shows that I haven't gotten into, primarily because the quality of my booth has not been up to the gallery look that they want for those kinds of shows. So I'm hoping it'll up my game at new shows for me. I'm going to stop rambling at you and hopefully you all can get your dinner or whatever's next for you on your adventure this evening. And I'll see you in a month. Thank you all.
Have a
Thanks.